Welcome back to Desk Careers. I am so excited to bring another incredible guest. Today we are meeting with Rima Abboud, who is the clinical psychologist at Neuropedia Children's Neuroscience Center. Welcome, Rima. How are you today?
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. I'm good. How are you? How's it going?
I'm great. I'm so excited to have you here. I've been meeting so many of your colleagues. It's really exciting to meet the team behind this incredible Neuropedia Children's Center. Tell me more about what it's like for you, not only to be a clinical psychologist working with children and adolescents, but to be working for this incredible center that caters to the needs of young children and young people in ways that hasn't been able to come into existence prior to Neuropedia.
The great thing about our team really is that we're quite close-knitted. We work together like a family, so everyone is there to support each other. So rather than having clinics where we have independent disciplines, here everyone is working together to bring the best service for the child and for the parents.
Amazing. It's almost like a dream come true. It's like the dream team. I in hearing all of you talk about the way that you work together, I walk away thinking it really is like a dream team, a parent and a child being able to have it all under that one roof. It must just be amazing to see all of your colleagues working together, all for that one common goal of helping this one young person to live a better quality life and to enrich the experiences that they have all as one team.
It really helps us understand the child as a whole, because everyone does bring in a different perspective about the child coming from different disciplines. And the parents find it comforting that there are many professionals who know their child and they're comfortable bringing them in.
Let's talk about you and your journey. I love taking my guests on a journey to their younger years, predominantly those years where it was the time that teachers or parents or family members and friends would be asking, "Hey, Rima, what do you want to be doing when you grow up?" Do you remember having conversations like that?
Absolutely. So we're talking about around 10 years ago. Psychology wasn't a very popular thing in my home country. It's considered something that, won't support me in the future. But it was one of those fields I really wanted to get to know more about. And they didn't offer any courses back in high school on psychology like they do now. But going forth, step at a time, I noticed that I am being led to more and more towards clinical psychology. And once I entered that domain, I found that I can be really helpful in the domain of children and adolescent psychology. So that was kind of the path.
Can you remember making those academic choices? How did you know that what you would be learning would eventually take you on a career path? Was it, I know you said they didn't have psychology in my time, but what subjects were you interested in that led you to psychology?
I was definitely interested in biology. The science of things was really interesting for me. But the domains that were scientific in nature were a bit either too laboratory based or too medical. And I was not comfortable with either. I wanted to have that human contact, but I did not want to be involved a lot in the medical field. It was not something I was comfortable with. And that is where, I started learning more about psychology and what a psychologist does. At the beginning, I didn't know that I was going to get to this point. It was like, I'm going to give it a go and trust the process. And that's how I, was able to finish the undergraduate degree and eventually get into graduate school.
And here you are today working with children and adolescents, but you're also helping parents along the way as well. Tell us
Absolutely.
what that's like as a clinician to to have the aim of supporting a young child, but at the same time supporting their parents and families?
Absolutely. Um, there is this misconception that children's psychology is quote unquote easier because you're dealing with a child, but actually you're dealing with a family rather than just because parents bring in their child. And when it comes to a child, there's a lot of concerns, there's a lot of worries, there's a lot of stigma as well attached to the fact that a child might have a mental health problem. So being aware of those concerns, being aware of the cultural aspects that the parents are bringing in is very important and requires a high degree of sensitivity to the matter.
What would you say are some of the well-needed strengths of a young person if they want to pursue a role like yours?
I would definitely encourage introspection. So the ability to kind of think inwards, to see how we feel about a certain thing, not to kind of dismiss any anxieties, any preconceived notions, any biases we might have. And also the basic ability to listen and to really listen rather than, passively listening.
I know one of the challenges that young people have here in the region is gaining the opportunity to shadow a clinician and to be able to see what the practice looks like in real life.
Yes.
And with this being a challenge, young people think, well, what am I supposed to do to gain experiences? What would your tips be for anyone that wants to learn more about the profession, but with the regulations not really allowing them in clinics? How can they get around it?
That's a really important point because we don't want to enter a field blindly, right? We want to know what's going to happen. We want to know what role they'll be playing. Unfortunately, it's true that not many junior psychologists or psychologists in training get that chance to observe. There are many instances where you can observe some part of the psychologist role, which is assessment, but the aspect that requires therapy is hard to observe because it's really a one-on-one session usually, and having a third person disrupts the flow, makes the individual or the client feel uncomfortable talking about personal things. Luckily, there are many books and documentaries that cover the role of the psychologist. There are many books that contain like role plays, examples of how the conversation flows in therapy. I believe that might be useful. But other than that, until the student reaches a point where they're qualified to practice under the supervision of a psychologist, it would be hard for them to observe.
Quite a challenging thing to do. But in hearing what you were saying about working with families and working with children, I almost imagine that it would be useful for a young person to think outside the box and observe children, perhaps in an educational platform, perhaps to observe how parents and children interact with each other at playgrounds or in malls.
Absolutely. That's a really good point.
So in looking deeper into your role, what are you doing today that you didn't learn academically? It's, in speaking to Dr. Sohal earlier, he was telling me you can learn and learn and learn, but until you're actually in practice, in person, there are certain things that you won't be able to learn until you actually have to do them. And in thinking about your career, would you say that that is also the case? Are there things that you've learned as a clinician that no one possibly could have prepared you for until you did it?
Absolutely. In learning while we're studying, it's really one way. We're absorbing the information that's being given to us. But when we're actually in the practical field, there's a lot of give and take. You're no longer an inactive or passive recipient. You have to take role. You have to take the lead. You have to show initiative. You have to lead the conversation. And that is something that we learned the hard way We get thrown in the ocean and we just have to learn how to do it. Luckily, having a good supervisor, especially early on for young psychologists, really helps give them that support, that emotional guidance as well, to kind of figure their way out.
Who would you say is your go-to career mentor when you think about your field?
It would definitely be a senior psychologist that I actually worked with earlier on. And she gave me the guidance I need, the training I need to get to where I am right now independently. So she would be someone who is senior in the field, would definitely be a go-to person for support and for like strategies.
Would you say that you, as a clinical psychologist, would you say that after you've studied and achieved your degrees, that that's it? I know that you encourage young people to read books that are related to psychology. Do you ever stop learning, or is your profession one of those that there's always something to be learning?
It's definitely a constantly growing field. There are always new disorders, new techniques, new strategies, new ways that are being incorporated, because there is a high cultural value. And what is invented in one culture might not really apply to other cultures. And there are still a lot of things that are not clear to us. A diagnosis of a disorder in one culture might be not a disorder in another culture. So it's on the contrary, it's constantly growing. So there's always that need to stay up to date, to keep training, to make sure that your skills are still evidence-based skills, rather than, forget aspects of them. We need to always keep polishing our skills.
Absolutely incredible. Rima, tell me more about your typical day. What's it like when you're on your way to work and you're thinking about that day ahead? What are some of the things that happen regularly? And then what are some of the things that don't happen regularly?
So in my field, it's always most of the time, it's the case that parents are coming in with concerns about their child. That is something that regularly happens. And you have to take that role where it's not that everything's going to be fine, rather than let's kind of deal with it. Let's see what's going on. Let's propose some solutions for the problem. So on a day-to-day basis, we have to do problem solving. We have to do support. We have to do emotional validation. And what's something that is common as well is that parents bring in their children at point of crisis, right? So we don't have parents coming in where the problem is still budding, especially in psychology, because it's still quite a taboo. It's only when it's the last resort do they come in. So these are some of the things that I usually expect during the day. It's also the case that when things do get better, we're not always around to see that. When people get better, they don't need us anymore. So that's one of the things that are quite, we're happy when it happens to our patients, but in some cases we do the assessment and the child keeps, goes on their way and really don't know what happens next. So that is something that doesn't often happen. And when I do hear, from my fellow professionals, speech there, when I do hear it, it's a really happy moment when I hear that things are getting better.
It must be very fulfilling, but I always wonder, how do psychologists step back and protect themselves from getting emotionally attached? Because we know that by doing that, we're not really able to support our clients and our patients. But at the same time, watching someone in their most vulnerable state has got to really weigh heavy on the emotional strings.
An emotional connection is always needed for the child and for the parent to feel that we care. Otherwise, soon we'll be replaced by IT and computers, right? but there always needs to be that human connection, that feeling that the other person does sympathize, empathize, understand what we're going through. And so there is an emotional weight that comes with each session. And the skill of dealing with that emotional weight comes with experience. So we have a lot of burnouts happening throughout the psychologist's role, but especially in the earlier phases, we do have a lot of frustration, a lot of sense of hopelessness, sense that we can't really help. So that comes early on. That's why young psychologists really need that guidance to support them in the process. But with senior psychologists, you really do gain that ability to care, to be emotionally present, but not carry that emotional load. It's something that I've been told comes with time.
It is. It's almost, it becomes an unconscious superhero skill, would you say, that, and you make it look seamless. And then I think that's what's the challenge for a young aspiring psychologist is they think, well, how do you do it all? But I believe for an experienced practitioner, you can't even say how you do it all because it's kind of a natural, but it's about time and experience and making lots of mistakes along the way. Would you say?
Absolutely. And learning from them. Absolutely.
Rima, if you had to do it all over again, what would you do different?
I would give myself, I'd send a letter back to my past self with a lot of advice on self-care, not taking it in, not blaming myself. A lot of, things that naturally we do along the way when we do make mistakes.
And would you say that one of what people expect from a clinical psychologist is that your life is all put together? Because how could you do this job? And when you meet young aspiring psychologists, is this a question that they ask you? Is it that my life has to be perfect for me to be able to do this job?
I wish. I wish that was the case. Absolutely not. I believe that even seeking that perfect life is overrated. It does not exist. There isn't, because it's always relative, right? It's always that there's comparisons. The most important thing is to keep in touch with our emotional state. And psychologists, like any other human being, do suffer or struggle from stress, and it is okay and we actually find it a lot of psychology students actually suffer from psychology related problems, and they go into the field trying to understand themselves more, try to figure out their own problems, and in that process it actually helps them understand other people's problems.
Back to that introspection that you were talking to us about earlier on. Thank you so much, Rima. This was a really, really fun conversation to have with you. I've learned so much. I think what I'm taking away most from your conversation with me today is that it's important for a young person to really become aware of what a clinical psychologist does before they decide to embark on a journey like this, because as other careers, there are lots of things that you learn along the way, but lots of things that you need to be prepared for if this is.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
And this brings us to the end of another incredible conversation. Today we were speaking with Rima Abboud, who is the child and adolescent clinical psychologist at Neuropedia Children's Neuroscience Center here in Dubai in the United Arab Emirates. I'll see you all at our next Desk Careers Digital Spotlight.